Now, Freddie, Lord Cameron was in America this week. How did his trip go down?
Well, I think just sort of a starter point, I think British people often exaggerate the importance of our politicians in America. For instance, I texted Roger Stone, who is this kind of long-time Trump advisor, who lives in Florida, to ask him about what he knew about the David Cameron visit to Mar-a-Lago in Florida to see Donald Trump. And his reply was, David Cameron, is he still alive? So I think we can kind of sort of, in terms of the way Americans think about it, we Brits can think that we're far more important than we are. Overall, I would say the press conference with Secretary of State Antony Blinken was perfectly smooth.
Yeah.
They were both singing from the same hymn sheet, but we knew that because they have been for some time, particularly on Gaza, and also on Ukraine. In terms of Cameron's attempt to gin up Republican support for Ukraine, which he is very keen to do, I don't think it went according to plan.
Last time he was in America, he wrote this op-ed and he talked about the 1930s and the danger of rerunning appeasement. And that seemed to go down pretty badly with some of the Republican congressmen and prompted Marjorie Taylor Greene's famous retort to him. This time it seemed perhaps maybe there was slightly more of a reluctance to be like that, sort of say, he began his press conference by saying, I'm not here to lecture anyone. Do you think there was a shift in tone at all, or do you think it played a bit differently?
I think he realises he messed up.
Right.
I think he knows that it went down very badly, lecturing Americans like that. Marjorie Taylor Greene famously, as you allude to, said, I think we can say it, can't we?
Yeah.
Said, kiss my arse. And so I think as a result, he realised now he has to kiss Donald Trump's arse.
And what do we know of that meeting and how it went down?
How the arse kissing went?
Yes.
I think it went, we don't quite know. Apparently there was a meeting in Florida today to discuss it. So we might find out.
Oh, right. So a meeting to discuss the meeting.
Yes, among in Trump world. But I don't know what actually Trump thinks of him. We assume that he probably quite likes him because he always says he likes everyone after they've met. He said it, every British statesman he's ever met. He said.
Even though Nigel Farage is quite critical of that Cameron, and obviously Farage is keen to talk up his links with Trump.
I think it wouldn't surprise me if Trump had spoken to Farage about Cameron in the build before or after, but Farage has not said anything about those conversations, so we don't know.
How much has Trump really been sticking to the kind of rhetoric we saw maybe last year about Ukraine and sort of being a waste of money, etc.? Is that still very much his position now?
Yes, he's actually gone himself. He's speaking about it slightly less.
Right.
I would say it's not one of his key talking points. Although if he's asked about it, he will say what he's always said, which is, "I will resolve it within
24 hours."
24 hours. Yeah, that's the timeline. And then the Washington Post had a rather revealing piece. They spoke to some people within Trump world about what they would actually do to resolve the conflict, to bring the conflict to an end. And a couple of interesting points about it. First, it's what you might think, which is we would tell Ukraine that they have to give land over, namely Crimea and bits of the Donbass. Vague as to what bits of the Donbass exactly, but there would be some sort of compromise that Ukraine would have to accept of giving land to the invader, which of course is unacceptable to Europe. The other interesting point about it is that a key part of the Trump strategy on a more sort of global level is to peel Russia away from China, because Trump foreign policy thinkers are concerned about the way that the Ukraine war has brought China and Russia together, and they want to stop that happening. Obviously for David Cameron, who has closer ties to China than most Western statesmen, I think it's fair to say, that he has a different way of looking at things. And so that's a kind of fission point.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that's perhaps the kind of key divide between how this government in the UK sees things differently to a possible incoming Trump government, which is that our main concern really in some ways has been about Russia and the Ukraine war, partly because we're both European nations, whereas in America they're much more focused on the China threat and sort of threat to Taiwan, for instance.
Certainly, and I don't think that's just a Republican thing, it's a Democratic thing. In fact, interestingly, Antony Blinken, in the press conference with David Cameron, mentioned China. He had a whole little section on China.
Indo-Pacific,
Indo-Pacific, South China Seas, China's unfair trade practices, and we were very keen to talk about that. Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, is talking about that.
Korean Peninsula. And
David Cameron, in his reply, he addressed every single one of Blinken's points, but not China. So I think there is a difference between the way America's thinking about China and the way Britain thinks about China. I think that's inevitable.
And that would almost, regardless of the outcome in November in the presidential election, that would probably remain the kind of linchpin of US policy, which is only about degrees, about sign of skepticism rather than kind of intent.
Yes, I think famously when Donald Trump was elected in 2016, there was a famous video which was a clip of every time he mentioned China.
China.
And that was seen as a joke at the time, but actually he has made American foreign policy far more, regardless of which party's in charge, far more focused on China.
And, in terms of the kind of Trump worldview, as it were, we've talked about China, for instance, but is there any kind of sort of more emphasis on what he would be doing in foreign policy other than sort of Ukraine as well? In kind of what key areas would he be doing? What's he learned from last time, 4 years on?
Well, I think on Gaza, what he's saying in public is what probably people like David Cameron and Antony Blinken are saying in private, which is Israel's lost the PR war. They need to hurry it up because they're embarrassing us all and we're getting a lot of flack from our electorates. And he said that out loud, I think, and that's why a lot of the public like Trump's foreign policy. It's not necessarily that it's more effective, it's just that in his dishonesty, he's a little bit more honest about it.
More candid, yeah.
Yeah, he's more candid about the lies.
Yeah.
Whereas Blinken and Cameron are still sort of posturing about, their concerns about humanitarian. No, I'm being too cynical. They are concerned about that, but it's the talking out of both sides of their mouth, which they're definitely doing over Gaza, which Trump is less inclined to do.
And for now, before the focus shifts to the presidential race, there's a lot of emphasis right now on what's happening in Congress and the big $50 billion aid package to Ukraine. Marjorie Greene has introduced, I think, a motion against the Speaker over there, and sort of a motion of censure. I mean, how likely is it that they're going to pass this big package of aid to Ukraine?
Well, I just would not like to be Speaker Mike Johnson. He's in a really difficult position because although he's ducked meeting David Cameron, he knows that these people to his right, particularly on Ukraine, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, they can get him out very easily if they don't like what he's doing. And he's got a tiny majority. He's got a majority of 2, could go down very soon to a majority of 1. He doesn't have a lot of wiggle room.
And finally, how do you think David Cameron's doing on the world stage right now? Katie's written this week's column on it. How do you think he's gone down around in the sort of chancelleries of Europe and beyond?
I think people who work in politics like David Cameron, because he's got good media presence, he can get through an interview sounding accomplished and so on. I think in terms of helping the Tories win the next election, I'm not sure he's doing a lot. But he's a polished speaker, and maybe that's all you need in a foreign secretary.
Thank you very much, Freddie.